we need to take matters into our own hands in the Gulf and try to influence and shape outcomes, whether with our partners in the US or across the region. We need to clarify where we're headed. It doesn't seem that the decapitation of certain individuals, including the supreme leader, will lead to the end of this regime. And I am not sure if, I mean, the call is for regime change by Israel and sometimes by the US, but you're going to get a chaotic result. And that will not be contained within Iran. It will touch the neighbors and beyond.
So Keir Starmer has hit back at President Trump regarding his military campaign against Iran, telling MPs he does not believe in regime change from the skies.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran by the US and Israel. That decision was deliberate. We believe that the best way forward for the region and for the world is a negotiated settlement. President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done, and I stand by it.
Despite this, the Prime Minister has agreed to the US using British military bases for defensive strikes on Iranian missile sites to help protect neighbouring Gulf states. I'm joined by Badr Al-Saif, a Professor of History at Kuwait University and Associate Fellow at Chatham House. He's based in Kuwait City. Badr, good evening to you. Thanks for speaking to us.
Good evening.
How are things in Kuwait as we speak to you? I wonder what the atmosphere is like there.
Quiet, measured, people are being careful. The government has taken proactive steps where employment, like employees have been decreased in government offices to 30% capacity. Teaching has switched to online, and there has been quite a proactive messaging process from the government showing, the stockpiling of food and water and the reporting on the injuries and the deaths. Unfortunately, we just heard of one death, another death today in Kuwait as a result of one of the strikes from Iran.
Yeah, it was a sailor, wasn't it, I think? Who was killed during an operation.
With his injuries, exactly. So this is serious. It's a volatile situation. We're hoping for our best. We would like, I think we need to go back to the negotiation table. This is not going to be solved on the battlefield. Everyone knows that, I think. And that's where we need to head soon. That's the best way forward.
What is, to simplify it, what is up for negotiation here? You say you've got to get back to the table to negotiate what exactly?
I think everything is up for negotiation, and it needs to not only involve the US and Iran, but frankly to also involve Israel, because the objectives are not clearly aligned between the US and Israel, even though it seems to be the case, but that's not really the case. We've known for the longest time that Israel has had regime change in mind. And this was the opportunity given to them to focus on this objective. The US in the past few days and prior to that have come up with a whole host of different objectives. So is it going to be blocking their nuclear ambitions, or is it going to be blocking their missile capacities or their proxy activity? We've lately heard them calling, the Iranians to rise to arms after the protests last month. So there is a clash in there from the US side.
Yeah, and look, this is confusing because we have heard from Donald Trump about regime change, but today he didn't really mention that. And so I wonder whether some of the uncertainty about what the US plan is, whether there is a plan, whether that means that Gulf states are caught up in the confusion, that you lose more lives because perhaps it's not entirely clear what the US objectives are here.
It is not clear, and that's why we need to take matters into our own hands in the Gulf and try to influence and shape outcomes, whether with our partners in the US or across the region. We need to clarify where we're headed. It doesn't seem that the decapitation of certain individuals, including the supreme leader, will lead to the end of this regime. And I am not sure if, the call is for regime change by Israel and sometimes by the US, but you're going to get a chaotic result. And that will not be contained within Iran. It will touch the neighbors and beyond. So we need to work with what we have. They've been a difficult neighbor for us in the Gulf, but that doesn't mean that we can let go of diplomacy and maintain our cool heads to try to find a way forward.
Yeah.
This regime has been around for 47 years. It's the business of the Iranian people to decide who they
Yes.
want there.
Yeah, but one perspective here is that precisely why Iran are going after Gulf states is to put pressure on you, to put pressure on Donald Trump to get back round the negotiating table. And from what you've said there, you that sort of may be true, that the more Iran bites and attacks at countries like Kuwait and other Gulf neighbouring states, the more that puts the pressure on you to get Donald Trump back round the table to stop Donald Trump's actions against Iran. So you're sort of, walking right into Iran's trap there, aren't you?
Look, we've been pursuing our support for mediation and peace prior to the war. So this is no change in our behavior in the Gulf states. This has been declared, and this is how we've been moving forward. They're fighting for their existence, and they're rationalizing the attacks on the Gulf, which obviously doesn't, it's something that we don't agree with. This is illegal nonetheless. But I think they need to understand that they're trying to raise the ante to apply pressure. And they're not going to be able to get results that way. And you're fighting a race in which the US and Israel on the one side would like to decimate and eliminate as much of the arsenal and the launchers in Iran, vis-a-vis the Iranians who want to incur as much cost, be it on friendly neighbors of theirs or on the partners of the US, or even when it hits, oil installations, as we've seen earlier today, to even damage, the energy security and the oil prices all the way down to the US. So it's a delicate balance that needs to be fought forward, and it's not going to go anywhere if we don't sit down and apply what we've been calling for all along. I don't think the attacks will help in that sense. And look, frankly, the Gulf states need to rely on themselves. They need to feel free to put something of a defensive posture to avoid these attacks on them. And the American security guarantees that have colored decades of our relationship with the US haven't always delivered.
Yeah.
We've seen this in 2019 when the Saudi's oil installations were attacked, when the Abu Dhabi airport was attacked in 2022, 12-day war, Doha was attacked last June, and now you come to this finale where all six Gulf states are being attacked on a daily basis.
Look, to that point, a bit of breaking news to bring you, Badr. That is the Iran's Revolutionary Guard force has said that Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. The military will set any ship trying to pass on fire, says Iran. Of course, it is the most vital oil export route, and this directly affects, again, Kuwait. Give me your reaction to that.
This is one of the worst case scenarios that was in place when the scenario planning was designed for a war in there, that they would limit or close off the Strait of Hormuz, which by the way impacts them as much as it impacts the other side of the Gulf, the Arab Gulf states, and the international community. This is something that will increase the escalation until they can find a way forward to avoid those navigation issues. We've seen this happen before with the Houthis, by the way, on the other strait, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The only difference there is, as you said, you don't have 20% of your oil installations going through the Strait of Mandeb as much as it is with Hormuz. So this is quite serious. You're right.
Yeah, and again, does this fit the presumption that Iran will squeeze its Gulf neighbours as much as it can to encourage them to tell Donald Trump to lay off, to stop?
Donald Trump listens to Donald Trump, and this is an unconventional.
Yeah, but he's not ignorant to the influence of. I mean, we talk about Qatar, Saudi Arabia. All of you together are a pretty important prospect when it comes to Donald Trump, particularly. Israel's also involved in this as well. But look, I mean, let's not forget the importance of the Gulf states in this, and whether they can realistically apply pressure, urge Donald Trump to get back around the negotiating table. It's something that you've said is needed.
They have in January, if you remember, there was a point in which there were leaks that the US was ready to shoot in January, and the Saudis, Qataris, and Omanis have succeeded in delaying that predicament. But unfortunately, it happened again. The threat perceptions and assessments that came from the US and Israel diverged with those in the Gulf. This is an ongoing discussion. Diplomacy is a lot of hard work. It doesn't mean that those discussions are happening just because of the pressures that we're getting from Iran, but because we want this. We want a normally functioning region in which all parties find a way forward for them to live in peace. We need to understand one another, and we need to put a way forward. The Iranians were ready to do that. It was the US that pulled out the plug, by the way, twice. Not only this past few days when Donald Trump stopped the negotiations, but even last June when the negotiations were taking place between the US and Iran via Omani mediation.
So from your perspective, it is Donald Trump who's not been listening. Iran has been ready to negotiate, has been ready to provide assurances to the United States on their nuclear enrichment program, that it's not going to get to a certain stage where it could support a nuclear weapon.
According to the Omani foreign minister's latest interview, he said that the Iranians were ready to let go of enrichment altogether, where there would be no stockpiling in their own country. So to get to that position is something that we didn't even see during the JCPOA discussions in 2014, 2015, after they were signed. So this is something that we need to develop. And mind you, I'm all for a holistic approach to Iran. I don't think that this should be contained to the nuclear file. We should look at their missile arsenal, we should look at their proxy activity, and we should pair it as well with Israel's destabilizing behavior. They also own a nuclear weapon, and they've been an expansionary state, wreaking havoc across their neighbors. Those need to be interlinked, and that hasn't been the case, unfortunately, in the discussions.
Look, thank you so much for being with us. Really fascinating perspectives there, and I'm glad we've been able to speak to you. Bader Al-Saif, Professor of History at Kuwait University and Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Thank you.